He sat alone in his parked car outside the elementary school, gripping the steering wheel, knowing that whatever decision he made in the next 5 minutes could quietly rearrange his daughter's entire world. Inside the building, children were lining up with backpacks and half-finished drawings, unaware that one father was questioning whether letting someone stay in his life was more dangerous than watching them leave. Daniel had never planned to let anyone get this close. As a single dad, his life had been reduced to essentials.
I am so sorry, Tariq.
Work,
I know I messed up the timing.
dinner,
I'm looking at the
homework,
application right now, and I just need a few more minutes to fix it before they close.
Repeat. There was comfort in the predictability and safety in knowing that disappointment, while lonely,
So if you put that number there,
was
what
at
do you get?
least
Oh,
familiar.
I see it now.
He had
You
learned
two are
the
doing
hard
so
way
well.
that when you love someone and you have a child, the cost of being wrong is never paid by you alone. Then she appeared, not dramatically, not insistently, but quietly, like someone who hadn't come to be noticed. She didn't ask many questions about his past, didn't offer advice about parenting, and didn't flinch when plans changed at the last minute. At first, Daniel assumed she wouldn't last because no one ever did once they understood the rules of his life. Dates ended early, conversations were interrupted by phone calls from school, and spontaneity simply didn't exist anymore. But she stayed present in the small moments most people ignored. She noticed how his daughter watched adults closely, as if trying to predict who might disappear next. She never promised anything, and somehow that made her presence feel heavier than any promise ever could. Daniel told himself he was being cautious, responsible, protective. What he didn't realize was that he was also slowly testing the limits of his own loneliness. And now, sitting outside the school with the engine off, he wondered whether protecting his child had quietly taught her that love was something you were supposed to keep at a distance. Daniel learned to measure his life in margins, not the dramatic kind, the sort that came with promotions or milestones, but the quiet, invisible margins that determined whether a day went smoothly or fell apart. 5 extra minutes before school pickup, enough groceries to last until Friday, just enough energy left at night to read one more story before bed. His world was built carefully, deliberately, around what he could manage without failing the one person who depended on him. Before Lily, he hadn't been this precise. He used to think of himself as flexible, adaptable, someone who could improvise when plans fell apart. But single parenthood had taught him a different lesson. Improvisation was a luxury. Structure was survival. Daniel worked nights at a distribution warehouse on the edge of town, the kind of place that never slept, and rarely noticed the people who kept it moving. The pay was steady, the hours predictable, and the health insurance, thin as it was, covered Lily's pediatrician visits without too many arguments from the billing department. He slept while she was at school, picked her up every afternoon, and spent evenings stitching together something that resembled normalcy. Dinner at 6, homework at the kitchen table, cartoons allowed only after spelling practice, baths that turned into negotiations, bedtime stories that sometimes turned into whispered conversations about monsters, friendships, and why other kids seemed to have 2 parents waiting at pickup. Daniel never lied to her. Not really. He answered questions honestly but carefully, editing his truths the way adults do when they're trying not to pass their own fears down like heirlooms. Her mother had died when Lily was 3, too young to remember details, old enough to remember absence. Daniel had learned quickly that grief didn't disappear. It changed shape. It surfaced in questions Lily didn't know were questions, in moments when she studied adults with an intensity that felt far older than 7. That was why Daniel didn't date. At least that was the reason he told himself. The truth was more complicated. Dating wasn't just about him anymore. It meant inviting someone into a space that had already been broken once. It meant risking Lily's sense of safety for the possibility, never the promise, of companionship. And Daniel had seen enough of the world to know that adults came and went easily, but children remembered. So he built rules. No introductions too soon, no overnights, no promises that couldn't be kept. If someone didn't like canceled plans because Lily got sick, they weren't compatible. If they needed reassurance that they mattered more than his child, they were already gone. These weren't tests, not consciously. They were filters, instincts sharpened by responsibility. Still, loneliness has a way of seeping through even the strongest routines. It arrived late at night after Lily was asleep, and the apartment was quiet in a way that felt too big. It showed up when he caught himself narrating his day out loud just to hear another voice. It lingered in moments when Lily laughed at something he didn't fully understand, and he wondered what it would be like to share that confusion with another adult. It was Lily who first noticed. "Do you get lonely, Dad?" she asked one evening, feet dangling from the couch, eyes fixed on a cartoon she'd already seen 3 times. Daniel hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wasn't sure which version of it was safe to give. "Sometimes," he said finally. She nodded as if confirming a theory. "Me too, but not when you're here." The comment stayed with him longer than it should have. Not because it was sweet, though it was, but because it revealed something he hadn't wanted to admit. Lily understood loneliness, and worse, she might be learning it from him. That was when he agreed to go on a date. Not because he was ready, not because he was hopeful, but because he was afraid that by avoiding connection entirely, he was teaching his daughter that distance was the safest form of love. The woman didn't arrive with expectations. That should have been his first warning. They met at a small cafe near Lily's school, chosen not for atmosphere, but convenience. Daniel arrived early, like he always did, scanning the room for exits, distractions, potential complications, old habits from a life where every variable mattered. She arrived on time, not dressed to impress, not dressed carelessly, just present. She didn't ask what he did for a living right away, didn't probe about Lily's mother, didn't frame her curiosity like an interview. They talked about neutral things at first: weather, books, the way the cafe burned its coffee but made up for it with pastries. Daniel found himself relaxing despite his better judgment. It was easier when nothing was being asked of him. Halfway through the conversation, his phone buzzed. School. He excused himself automatically, already apologizing, already preparing for the shift in tone that usually followed. Emergencies had a way of revealing how much inconvenience someone was willing to tolerate. But when he returned, she hadn't changed. No sigh, no tight smile, no subtle recalculation. "Everything okay?" she asked genuinely. He nodded. "Just Lily's teacher. She forgot her lunch." "That happens," she said simply. "Do you need to go?" He studied her face for signs of disappointment. Found none. "No," he said slowly. "I can drop it off after." She nodded, accepting this adjustment without commentary, without turning it into a test of priorities. And something in Daniel shifted, not dramatically, not consciously, but enough to make him take note. This was unfamiliar. Over the next few weeks, they met again. Not often, not predictably. Schedules clashed, plans moved, and sometimes nothing happened at all. Daniel half expected her to fade out quietly, the way most people did when the reality of his life became inconvenient. But she didn't. She didn't ask to be introduced to Lily, didn't push for more time, didn't interpret his limitations as a lack of interest. Instead, she adapted. When he had to cancel, she accepted it without making him feel guilty. When conversations were cut short, she picked them up later without resentment. She listened more than she spoke, especially when he talked about Lily, not with fascination, not with performative enthusiasm, but with attention. That was what unsettled him. Attention without agenda. Daniel had learned to read people quickly. He could usually tell who was being patient and who was waiting, who was generous and who was investing. This woman didn't fit neatly into either category. He told himself not to trust it. He reminded himself that people were complicated, that intentions revealed themselves over time, not in first impressions. He kept emotional distance the way he kept spare change in his pocket, just in case. But Lily noticed before he did. "Who were you talking to?" she asked one evening, peering at his phone. "A friend," he said. She tilted her head. "You smiled." Daniel hadn't realized he had. That night, after Lily fell asleep, he sat alone at the kitchen table and confronted a thought he'd been avoiding. Not about the woman, not directly, but about himself. He wasn't afraid of being hurt. He was afraid of choosing wrong. Because when you are responsible for a child, love stops being personal. It becomes ethical. Every decision echoes forward, shaping how another human being learns to trust, to attach, to let go. Daniel had built his life around limits to protect Lily from instability. But limits, he was starting to realize, could also become walls. And walls, no matter how well-intentioned, eventually keep everything out, including the good. He didn't know yet what this woman meant or whether she would stay. He only knew that for the first time since Lily's mother died, someone had entered his carefully structured world without trying to rearrange it, and that frightened him more than loneliness ever had. Daniel did not ask her why she was available on weekday afternoons. It was the kind of detail that, under normal circumstances, would have triggered polite curiosity. Most adults he knew were anchored to rigid schedules, jobs, meetings, obligations that defined where they could be and when. Availability usually meant either privilege or instability, and Daniel had learned not to assume either without evidence. So he let the question sit unanswered. Instead, he noticed smaller things. The way she never complained when he checked the time. How she didn't flinch when their conversations revolved around school schedules and grocery lists instead of ambitions and 5-year plans. She spoke easily, but selectively, as though she was choosing each detail with care rather than filling silence for comfort. That was new. Most people, Daniel had found, revealed themselves too quickly. They over-explained, over-performed, eager to define who they were before anyone could misunderstand them. This woman did the opposite. She let space exist between sentences, let moments breathe. It was unsettling in a way that made him pay attention. He noticed, too, that she never asked about Lily's mother, not once. This wasn't restraint born of disinterest. Daniel could tell the difference. It was the same restraint he used himself, the kind that came from knowing that some truths weren't meant to be extracted. They were meant to be offered. When he finally mentioned his wife, it wasn't during a heavy conversation. It slipped out casually, almost accidentally, as they stood outside the cafe waiting for traffic to clear. "She would have liked this place," he said, gesturing toward the window. Quiet, no pressure to stay long. The word surprised him as soon as they left his mouth. She didn't respond immediately, didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She simply nodded, absorbing the information as something to be held, not reacted to. "I'm glad she had you," she said after a moment. "And Lily." That was all. No follow-up questions, no attempt to step closer to grief she hadn't been invited into. Daniel felt something loosen in his chest, something he hadn't realized he'd been holding tight. Still, he kept his distance. Not because he didn't enjoy her company, he did, but because enjoyment was dangerous. Enjoyment tempted you into imagining continuity, into picturing scenes that required assumptions about the future, and assumptions were the enemy of preparedness. He knew nothing about her past. Nothing about why she lived alone, nothing about what she wanted next, and she seemed content to keep it that way. The imbalance was noticeable. Daniel talked more than he meant to, about Lily's school projects, about work frustrations, about the quiet satisfaction of fixing something broken with his hands. She listened with a kind of attention that made him feel as though none of it was wasted breath. But when it came to her, She offered fragments. She liked mornings but hated early commitments. She read nonfiction when she felt unsteady, novels when she felt brave. She had moved recently, though she never said from where. Daniel told himself this was a red flag. People who withheld information usually did so for a reason, and reasons were rarely benign. But there was no calculation in her silence, no strategic deflection. When he asked something directly, she answered, just not expansively. It took him weeks to realize something else. She never positioned herself as an answer. She didn't suggest ways to make his life easier, didn't offer parenting advice disguised as concern, didn't imply that with the right adjustments, things could be better. She accepted his life as it was, not as a project. That should have made her easy to categorize. It didn't. The first time Lily entered the conversation, it wasn't because Daniel mentioned her. She checks her phone the same way you do, the woman said once, nodding toward a little girl waiting with her mother at the bus stop across the street, like she's bracing for bad news. Daniel followed her gaze, startled. You noticed that? She shrugged. I notice kids. They're honest in ways adults aren't. That was when Daniel felt a flicker of unease. Not suspicion, something closer to recognition, as though she was speaking from experience he hadn't been told about. It wasn't until later, much later, that the truth began to surface. Not in a confession, but in cracks. He noticed how she stiffened when Lily's name came up unexpectedly, how she avoided playgrounds even when it would have been convenient to pass through one, how she changed the subject when conversations drifted toward childhood nostalgia. Daniel had learned not to push. Pushing made people defensive. Waiting made them honest. The truth came out on a night neither of them had planned for. Lily had a fever. Not serious, but enough to derail everything. Daniel texted to cancel without explanation, already preparing for disappointment on the other end of the phone. Instead, she replied with a single line, "Do you need anything?" The question unsettled him, not because it was intrusive, but because it wasn't. There was no assumption embedded in it, no expectation of being needed, just an offer that could be declined without consequence. No, he typed back after a pause, but thank you. Several minutes passed. Then another message. If you change your mind, I'm nearby. He stared at the screen longer than necessary. That night, after Lily finally fell asleep, he sat alone in the dim kitchen and felt the weight of something unfamiliar, being seen without being examined. He realized then that the woman had never tried to insert herself into his life. She had simply made room for it. The next time they met, Daniel asked a question he had been avoiding. Why are you so careful? He said, not accusing, just curious. She looked at him for a long moment as though deciding whether the question was safe. I've learned what happens when you aren't, she said finally. That was the closest she came to an explanation, but the truth, when it finally arrived, did so without drama. They were sitting on a park bench, Lily at school, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the grass. Daniel was talking about nothing in particular when she interrupted him softly. There's something you should know about me, she said. He braced himself. Years of experience had taught him that sentences like that rarely led anywhere good. I wasn't always this unattached, she continued. I had a child, a son. The words landed heavily, but not loudly. Daniel didn't speak. I was young, she said, her voice steady but distant, and afraid. I told myself I wasn't ready, that someone else could give him more than I could, so I left. Not dramatically, no screaming, just gone. Daniel felt his instincts flare. Not judgment, not anger, but protection. His thoughts went immediately to Lily, to the quiet ways abandonment embedded itself into a child's understanding of the world. I don't say this to justify it, she added quickly, as if reading his silence. I say it because it's part of why I'm the way I am now, why I don't promise things. Why I don't step into spaces I haven't earned? Daniel stared out at the empty playground. He didn't know what to say, and for once that felt appropriate. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. Not from you, not from anyone. I've spent years learning how to live with the consequences of a choice I can't undo. He nodded slowly. This was not a confession meant to bind him. It was not a plea for understanding. It was information offered because withholding it would have been dishonest. And honesty, Daniel realized, could be more unsettling than deception. He didn't know what to do with this knowledge. He only knew that it changed the shape of the woman he thought he knew and clarified the caution he had mistaken for distance. She wasn't hiding because she wanted control. She was hiding because she understood the cost of being wrong. As they sat there in silence, Daniel felt the weight of a realization settle in his chest. This wasn't a story about a man learning to trust again. It was a story about two people carrying different kinds of regret, circling something fragile, each afraid of what their presence might break. And somewhere, unspoken between them, was the quiet understanding that when children are involved, love is never just emotional. It is consequential. Daniel never thought of himself as someone who tested people. Testing implied intent, an experiment, a hypothesis, a desired outcome. What he did felt more instinctive than deliberate, shaped by years of learning how quickly things could unravel when adults underestimated the impact of their choices. Still, looking back, he would later recognize the pattern. The tests were never announced. They arrived disguised as ordinary inconveniences, the kinds of moments that revealed more about a person than any carefully worded conversation ever could. The first test came when Lily spilled juice. They were sitting at a small diner, one Daniel had chosen precisely because it was loud and forgiving. Laminated menus, chipped mugs, floors that had already seen worse. He had agreed to bring Lily along after weeks of hesitation, convinced that the woman deserved to know what his life actually looked like. Lily had been nervous at first, unusually quiet, her eyes tracking every movement. Daniel recognized the behavior immediately. She was observing, collecting data in her own way. The spill happened quickly. One careless elbow, a tipped glass, orange juice spreading across the table and dripping onto the floor. "I'm sorry," Lily said instantly, voice tight, eyes wide. Daniel felt the familiar rush of calculation. How would this be handled? With annoyance, forced reassurance, a performative dismissal meant to impress him? He reached for napkins automatically. "It's okay," the woman said at the same time. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to be heard. She didn't jump up to clean it herself, didn't scold, didn't rush to fix the moment. She simply slid her napkin toward Lily and waited, allowing the child to participate in repairing the mistake without turning it into a spectacle. Lily wiped the table carefully, her shoulders relaxing inch by inch. No one laughed it off. No one overreacted. The moment passed. Daniel said nothing, but something in his chest loosened. The second test came in the form of cancellation. Lily woke up coughing one morning, cheeks flushed, eyes glassy. Daniel didn't hesitate. He texted to cancel their plans, keeping the explanation brief. "She's sick. I'm staying home." There was no apology attached. He had learned not to apologize for prioritizing his child. The response came quickly. "Of course, I hope she feels better." No disappointment, no follow-up questions disguised as concern, no subtle pressure to reschedule immediately as if reassurance were required. Later that day, Lily asked, "Did you cancel because of me?" Daniel froze. "No," he said carefully. "I canceled because you needed me." She considered this. "So people can wait?" "Yes," he said. "The right ones can." That night, after Lily fell asleep, Daniel sat alone and realized something unsettling. He had expected the woman to pass these moments without complaint, expected it so strongly that he hadn't acknowledged the possibility that she might not. Expectation, he realized, was just another kind of test. The third test came from Lily herself. Children, Daniel knew, were far less interested in politeness than in truth. Lily didn't ask safe questions. She asked the ones adults tried hardest to avoid. "Why don't you sleep here?" Lily asked one evening, gesturing vaguely between them. The woman didn't look to Daniel for permission. She didn't laugh nervously or deflect with humor. "Because your dad and I are still getting to know each other," she said, "and because this is your home first." Lily nodded slowly, filing the information away. "Are you going to leave?" she asked next. Daniel's breath caught. The woman didn't answer immediately. She crouched down to Lily's eye level, not invading her space, just aligning with it. "I don't know what will happen," she said honestly, "but if I ever do leave, it won't be because of you, and I would tell you first." Daniel watched Lily's face, saw the tension ease just slightly. Not comforted, but respected. That night, Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his thoughts heavier than usual. He had not prepared Lily for this conversation. He had assumed he could manage introductions carefully enough to avoid moments like this. He was wrong. Children sensed emotional shifts long before adults acknowledged them. Lily had noticed the woman's presence, not because it disrupted routines, but because it didn't, and that frightened him. The test continued quietly, accumulating without being named. A grocery run that took longer than expected because Lily insisted on choosing cereal. A birthday party invitation that required leaving early. A night when Lily refused to sleep alone and insisted on another story. Each time Daniel watched, not with suspicion but with awareness. He noted what changed and what didn't. The woman never tried to speed Lily up, never rolled her eyes, never framed patience as generosity. She treated interruptions as part of the landscape, not obstacles to be endured. But there was another test unfolding beneath the surface, one Daniel hadn't fully acknowledged until it was already happening. He was testing himself. He noticed how quickly he became defensive when Lily grew attached, how he mentally rehearsed explanations for why this might not last, how he downplayed his own enjoyment as if pleasure were a liability he needed to manage. He told himself he was being responsible, but responsibility, he was beginning to understand, could be indistinguishable from fear. The most difficult test arrived unannounced on a day that should have been unremarkable. They were at a park, Lily playing nearby, when the woman stood up abruptly, scanning the crowd. Her posture changed, alert, tense, protective. Daniel followed her gaze, saw nothing immediately alarming. "What is it?" he asked. She exhaled slowly. "Nothing, sorry. Habit." He waited. She didn't elaborate. Later, when Lily had wandered off to climb, Daniel asked gently, "What kind of habit?" She hesitated, then spoke. "Watching for exits. Making sure I can leave if I need to." The admission lingered between them. Daniel nodded. He understood that instinct intimately. It was the same one that kept him near doors, that made him memorize routines, that refused to relax fully, even in safe places. They were not testing each other out of cruelty or curiosity. They were testing whether the world was still dangerous. The realization softened something in him. For the first time, Daniel considered the possibility that caution didn't have to mean isolation, that two people could acknowledge risk without letting it dictate every decision. Still, fear had its own momentum. One evening, as Lily slept, Daniel sat across from the woman at the kitchen table, the quiet thick with unspoken thoughts. "I need to know something," he said finally. She looked up, attentive but wary. "If this becomes harder," he continued, choosing his words carefully, "if being around us costs you more than you expected, will you tell me?" She didn't answer immediately. "Yes," she said at last, "I will, and I won't disappear." Daniel nodded. It wasn't reassurance, it wasn't a promise of permanence, it was honesty. And honesty, he was learning, was the only foundation sturdy enough to hold anything real. That night he lay awake again, listening to Lily breathe softly down the hall, thinking about how much of his life had been shaped by silent tests, his own and others. He wondered for the first time whether passing every test was less important than recognizing when they were no longer necessary, because somewhere along the way, the tests had stopped protecting Lily. They had started protecting him. And Daniel was no longer sure that was the lesson he wanted his daughter to learn. Lily did not ask permission to understand what was happening. She never had. Daniel had once believed that adults controlled the emotional narrative of a household, that children followed along, absorbing only what they were told. Single parenthood had dismantled that illusion quickly. Children, he learned, were not passive. They were interpreters. They read tone before words, absence before explanation. Lily had been watching long before Daniel realized there was something to watch. She noticed how the woman's name came up more often in conversation, how Daniel smiled without realizing it when he checked his phone, how plans shifted not with tension but with accommodation. To a child who had learned to track emotional weather for survival, these changes were impossible to miss. The first time Lily spoke about it directly, it wasn't framed as curiosity, it was framed as assessment. "You act different when she's around," Lily said one afternoon as Daniel folded laundry. "Different how?" he asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. "Quieter," she said, "but not tired quiet, thinking quiet." Daniel paused, a shirt halfway folded in his hands. "That's not a bad thing," she added, as if clarifying a concern. He nodded slowly. "No, it's not." That was the moment he realized Lily was not waiting to be reassured. She was gathering information, the same way she did at school, the same way she did with new teachers and unfamiliar classmates. She wanted to know whether this change was safe. When the woman started spending more time around them, never intrusively, never unannounced, Lily adjusted her behavior in subtle ways. She tested boundaries not by acting out, but by observing reactions. She asked questions designed to provoke honesty. "Do you like kids? Why don't you have any? Are you good at staying?" The woman never answered immediately. She never dismissed the questions as inappropriate or cute. She treated them as what they were, important. "I like kids," she said once, "but liking them and being ready for them aren't always the same thing." Lily nodded, satisfied with the distinction. Another time Lily asked, "Do you know how to leave without making people sad?" The woman hesitated, then replied, "No, I don't think anyone really does." Lily accepted this too. Daniel watched these exchanges from a distance, unsettled not by what was said, but by how much was understood. He had spent years trying to shield Lily from emotional complexity, only to discover that she had been navigating it all along. The pivotal moment came on a Sunday afternoon. They were at home, rain tapping steadily against the windows, the kind of quiet day that magnified small things. Lily sat at the table drawing while Daniel cleaned the kitchen. The woman was nearby, reading, her presence unassuming. Lily looked up suddenly. "If you stop coming," she said, "will Dad be sad?" The room stilled. Daniel's heart thudded painfully. He moved instinctively, ready to intervene, to redirect, to soften the question. But the woman spoke first. "Yes," she said gently, "I think he would be." Lily considered this. "Would you be sad?" "Yes," the woman said again without hesitation. Lily nodded once, then returned to her drawing. Daniel stood frozen, caught between gratitude and fear. The honesty had been simple, but its impact was enormous. No reassurance had been offered, no future promise, just truth laid plainly on the table. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Daniel confronted the weight of what had happened. "She's getting attached," he said quietly. The woman didn't argue. "I know." "That's dangerous," he said, "for her." "And for you," she replied. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion pressing down on him. "I can't afford to be wrong," he said. "Not about this." The woman nodded. "Neither can I." There it was, the unspoken truth made explicit. This wasn't a casual connection unfolding accidentally. It was a fragile structure being built in real time without blueprints under the constant threat of collapse. Lily, meanwhile, continued to observe. She noticed that the woman never tried to take Daniel's place, never corrected him in front of her, never positioned herself as an authority. When Lily asked for help, the woman looked to Daniel first, silently confirming that it was okay to step in. This restraint did not go unnoticed. One night, Lily asked Daniel, "Is she scared of me?" Daniel frowned. "Why would you think that?" "She doesn't touch my stuff without asking," Lily said, "and she always waits." Daniel swallowed. "I don't think she's scared of you," he said carefully. "I think she respects you." Lily thought about this. That's good, she decided, but respect alone was not enough. Children needed consistency. They needed to know what to expect, not just in routines, but in emotional availability. Lily had learned early that adults could vanish without warning. What she was testing now was not whether the woman was kind, but whether she was honest about her limits. The test came unexpectedly, as these things often do. They were walking home from school when Lily stopped abruptly. "If you leave," she said to the woman, "will you tell me first?" Daniel's breath caught. The woman crouched slightly, bringing herself to Lily's level without crowding her. "Yes," she said, "I would." "Promise?" Lily asked. The woman paused. "I can promise to tell you the truth," she said slowly, "but I won't promise something I don't know I can keep." Lily studied her face, searching for something beyond words. "Okay," she said at last. That night, Lily asked Daniel a question she had never asked before. "Is it okay to want people to stay?" she said, her voice small in the dark. Daniel closed his eyes. He had spent years teaching her resilience, independence, acceptance of loss. He had taught her how to be okay without guarantees, but he had not taught her how to want. "Yes," he said quietly. "It's okay." "What if they don't?" she asked. Daniel pulled her closer. "Then it will hurt," he said honestly, "but that doesn't mean wanting was wrong." Lily was silent for a long time. "Dad?" she whispered. "Yes?" "I think she's trying." The words landed heavily in Daniel's chest. Trying. Not succeeding, not committing, just trying. In that moment, Daniel understood something he had been resisting. Lily was not asking him to protect her from pain at all cost. She was asking him to show her how to live honestly in the presence of uncertainty. The child had already accepted the risk. It was the adult who was hesitating. Daniel lay awake that night, listening to the rain, thinking about how carefully he had constructed a life designed to minimize damage. He had confused safety with avoidance, protection with withdrawal. Lily had seen through it all. She had recognized effort where he saw danger, presence where he saw risk. She had not demanded certainty, only sincerity, and that terrified him because it meant the next choice would not be about caution, it would be about courage. Daniel had always believed that love was something you felt, something that arrived uninvited, took up space, disrupted routines, and demanded attention. He had experienced that version once, years ago, before grief rewrote the rules of his life. After Lily's mother died, love stopped feeling spontaneous. It became deliberate, heavy, with consequence. Now, standing in his small kitchen late one evening, Daniel understood that love, real love, was no longer an emotion to chase. It was a decision. The decision arrived quietly without ceremony. The woman stood across from him, arms folded loosely, her posture relaxed but guarded. Lily was asleep down the hall, her door cracked open the way she liked it. The apartment hummed with ordinary sounds, the refrigerator, the distant traffic, the subtle rhythms of a life built on routine. "I might have to leave," the woman said. The words were calm, carefully placed, as though she had rehearsed them in her head many times before allowing them into the room. Daniel didn't respond immediately. "An opportunity came up," she continued. "Out of state. It's complicated, but it would mean a clean break, a chance to start over. He nodded slowly. He had learned not to interrupt moments like this. People deserve space to tell their truths without being rushed into reaction. I'm not asking you to come with me, she added quickly, and I'm not asking you to wait. She stopped, exhaled. I needed you to know before I decide. Daniel leaned against the counter, feeling the familiar tightening in his chest. This was the moment he had been preparing for since the beginning. The outcome his caution had predicted all along. And yet, it hurt more than he expected. Have you told Lily? He asked quietly. No, she said, I wouldn't. That's your place, not mine. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. This was the heart of it. Not whether he wanted her to stay, not whether he could imagine a future that included her, but whether wanting her to stay was fair. Lily had already learned too much about impermanence. Daniel had promised himself that he would never ask her to attach to someone whose presence was uncertain. And yet uncertainty was unavoidable. People left. Circumstances changed. Control was always an illusion. The question wasn't how to prevent pain. It was how to face it honestly. That night, Daniel sat on the edge of Lily's bed long after she fell asleep, watching the slow rise and fall of her chest. He thought about all the lessons he had taught her, how to be resilient, how to adapt, how to accept change without falling apart. He wondered what he had failed to teach. In the morning, Lily sensed the shift immediately. You're thinking loud again, she said over breakfast. Daniel smiled faintly. Am I? She nodded. Is something wrong? He considered deflecting, considered protecting her with silence. Then he remembered her question from weeks ago. Is it okay to want people to stay? Yes, he said finally. Something might change. Lily paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. Is she leaving? I don't know yet, he said honestly. Lily studied his face, then looked down at her cereal. That's scary, she said. Yes, Daniel agreed. It is. She was quiet for a long moment, then she looked up. Are you scared because you'll be sad, she asked, or because I will be? The question struck him with painful precision. I think both, he said. Lily nodded slowly, absorbing this. If she goes, she said, will you be mad at her? No, Daniel said without hesitation. Why not? Because sometimes people don't leave to hurt you, he said. They leave because they're trying to survive. Lily considered this carefully, her brow furrowed in thought. I don't like it, she said at last. But I get it. Daniel felt something shift inside him. Not relief, not resolution, but clarity. Later that day, he met the woman at the park. Lily stayed with a friend, unaware of the weight of the conversation unfolding beneath the trees. I talked to Lily, Daniel said once they were seated. Her shoulders tensed slightly. About me? Yes. She swallowed. And? She knows something might change, he said. She doesn't know details, just the truth. The woman nodded. Thank you. They sat in silence for a moment, the space between them heavy but honest. I won't ask you to stay, Daniel said finally, and I won't ask you to go. She looked at him, surprised. I won't make this decision for you, he continued, because if I do, then whatever happens next becomes my responsibility alone. And that wouldn't be fair to you or to Lily. She studied his face, searching for something. Aren't you afraid? She asked. Yes, he said simply. She waited. But fear isn't a reason, he continued, to take away someone else's agency. The woman exhaled shakily, emotion flickering across her face. No one has ever said that to me before. Daniel shrugged slightly. No one ever said a lot of things to me either. I'm still figuring this out. They talked for hours about regret, about responsibility, about the ways children anchored you to the present, whether you were ready or not. Daniel spoke openly about Lily, not idealizing her, not using her as leverage, but acknowledging the reality of her needs. She comes first, he said quietly. Always. That's not negotiable. The woman nodded. I wouldn't want it any other way. In the end, the decision wasn't dramatic. There was no grand declaration, no promise of permanence. She chose to stay, not because she was certain, not because she felt entitled to happiness, but because she was willing to try, fully, honestly, without escape routes, disguised as caution. When she told Lily, she did so carefully. "I'm not going anywhere right now," she said, "but if things ever change, I'll tell you." Lily studied her face for a long moment. "Okay," she said, "you can stay." It wasn't approval, it was permission. Life didn't transform overnight. There were arguments, awkward moments, missteps that couldn't be smoothed over with good intentions. Daniel struggled with control. The woman struggled with vulnerability. Lily struggled with the fear that stability was temporary by nature, but they stayed. Not because everything felt safe, but because they chose honesty over avoidance. Daniel learned that loving someone while protecting a child didn't mean eliminating risk. It meant modeling how to face it, how to tell the truth even when it was uncomfortable, how to choose presence over guarantees. One evening, weeks later, Lily sat between them on the couch, half watching a movie. "Dad?" she asked. "Yes." "I think love is when people try even if it's scary." Daniel smiled, his chest tightening. "I think you're right." He looked at the woman beside him, then back at his daughter, and understood something he had resisted for a long time. Love, when children are involved, is no longer about what you feel. It is about what you are willing to risk ethically, carefully, with your eyes open. It is about choosing to be present without pretending you can control the outcome. And for the first time since his world had broken years ago, Daniel felt something close to peace, not because everything was certain, but because he was no longer hiding from the possibility of being known. Nothing about their life suddenly became simple. There was no moment where Daniel woke up confident that he had finally figured everything out, no clear line marking where fear ended and trust began. Some mornings he still felt the instinct to retreat, to tighten the boundaries he had built so carefully over the years. Some nights he still wondered whether allowing someone close was a mistake he would one day have to explain to his daughter. But life kept moving forward anyway. Lily grew taller. Her questions became more precise, less forgiving of vague answers. She noticed everything. The way adults pause before responding, the difference between reassurance and truth, the small choices that revealed what people were really afraid of. Daniel learned that children didn't need certainty to feel safe. They needed consistency. They needed honesty delivered without panic. And they needed adults who were willing to stay present even when outcomes were unclear. The woman never became a replacement for anything that had been lost. She did not erase absence or fill a role that belonged to the past. Instead, she occupied her own space, imperfectly, cautiously, but sincerely. Some days that space felt fragile. Other days it felt strong enough to hold all three of them without strain. Daniel stopped asking whether this would last. He learned that the better question was whether he was showing Lily how to live truthfully in the moment she was actually in, rather than preparing her for a future that might never arrive. He learned that protecting a child did not mean shielding them from every possible pain. It meant teaching them that pain could be faced without self-betrayal. There were still arguments, still misunderstandings, still moments when walking away would have been easier than staying. But they stayed, not because staying guaranteed happiness, but because leaving without honesty would have guaranteed something worse. One evening, long after bedtime, Daniel stood in the doorway of Lily's room, watching her sleep. He realized that for the first time since she was born, he was no longer making decisions solely out of fear of loss. He was making them out of respect for her capacity to feel, to hope, to understand. He had once believed that love was something you earned by choosing correctly. Now he understood that love was something you practiced carefully, imperfectly, without certainty, and without disguising fear as wisdom. The story did not end with promises, it ended with presence, with ordinary days unfolding without scripts, with trust built not through guarantees but through repetition, showing up again and again, even when it was uncomfortable, with the quiet courage to remain visible instead of retreating into control. And perhaps that was the real lesson Daniel would pass on to his daughter. Not that love was safe, not that it was permanent, but that it was worth meeting honestly, without armor, even when the ending was unknown. Because sometimes the most meaningful choice isn't about securing the future, it's about refusing to disappear from the present.